The Soulsborne games are some of my favorite games of all time. I mean, you can tell based on the type of content I make on them. What truly makes these games so special to not just me, but a lot of other people as well is their fantastic art style, lore, and gameplay. But obviously it goes deeper than that. These games resonated with a lot of people to the point where they even inspired a whole new subgenre in gaming, the Souls-like genre. Many of these Souls-like games are decent and some are actually great. However, if you ask me or a lot of true Soulsborne fans if they prefer any of these over the actual FromSoft games, many would say, fuck no. Not that the games are bad though or anything, shit, some of them are even great as I said, but most people would agree that they are not on FromSoft level, at least just not as yet. But why though? Is it because they lack the core foundations of what makes a game great or fun? Is it that they try too hard to imitate FromSoft's titles? Could it be that they don't share the same budget as FromSoft? Or is it that no matter how great the game is, due to people's bias and love for the Soulsborne franchise, no mere Souls-like would ever step close to those games, at least to the fans? Well, I'm gonna tell you the real reason or reasons why Souls-likes just don't hit the same like the actual FromSoft games. Let's talk about the foundations. Amazing store, lore, world, and gameplay. But under gameplay, there are way more sub-foundations for Souls-likes. The combat, level design, and boss fights. Let's start with the story and lore and see what's most likely, what most Souls-likes get wrong. To put it simply, a lot of Souls-likes have bad stories, or stories that are just mid at best. They try to implement the same mysterious, not so straightforward type of storytelling that FromSoft usually does, but the only reason that works with, the actual Souls games is because they already have a unique and interesting world filled with unique and interesting characters. I remember playing my first ever Souls game, Dark Souls 3, for the first time, and after finishing it, I was just curious to actually find out what the fuck was actually going on in the world. Why is it like that? What is happening? Then that's where I stumbled upon Soulsborne lore YouTubers. After watching some videos, I realized that damn, this shit is deep as hell. And ever since I fell in love with the Soulsborne way of telling stories. You see, in the Soulsborne games, the story isn't as upfront like others. Most of the lore is told through, the characters you meet or through random item descriptions or some shit. But that doesn't mean it's confusing or hard to follow. It's just deep and interesting. Now, a lot of Souls-likes tend to imitate this form of storytelling, and well, they don't really do a great job of it. Most of the time it feels like a cop-out on actually making a good story for their games. See, what these devs tend to not understand is that the reason why people love the Soulsborne approach to storytelling is because behind all the cryptic and mysterious way of telling the story and lore is actually really good. You can tell that they spent a lot of time building the world, making it as interesting as possible. I feel like though most Souls-likes have the story as an afterthought and choose to focus on other areas first. And there is nothing wrong with this because I believe that with the game, gameplay comes first. However, this impacts world building and overall lore because of the less time and focus these stories get. It also feels like the devs just said, you know what, let's just make it cryptic and mysterious as possible like the Soulsborne games. They do this but expect you to love their lore and world, but most of the times I genuinely do not care because at a surface level you can tell that the story is just mid as fuck. Let's take a look at the new Lords of the Fallen for example. I'm gonna be honest, I did not care for the lore of this or just the story of this game. As another YouTuber puts it, it's just another dark fantasy filled with generic dark fantasy mumbo jumbo dialogue and lore. Also, I know what I said is mostly subjective because I know that a lot of people really love that type of like extremely dark fantasy setting that Lords of the Fallen takes place in. But I know for sure that a lot of people definitely agree with me when I say that it does feel a bit generic at times. All I'm saying is it's just not my cup of tea, so I guess you could say like it's subjective. I don't know. Okay, but what if they don't try to emulate that specific style of storytelling? Well, an example of this would be Neo, specifically Neo 2. The Neo games have a more active story than a lot of other Souls-likes and Soulsborne games. And in terms of gameplay, the Neo games are said to be one of, if not the best Souls-likes out there. However, story-wise, they're kinda lame. At least to me. The story and world didn't grab my attention like that. Okay, I'm lying. The world kind of, because all the cool powers and shit, but the overall story, was just not super interesting to me. However, world and lore aside, luckily the Neo games are actually really fun, so they definitely get a pass. Now let's talk about Souls-likes that actually have a good story and lore. First, let's talk about Lies of P and Blasphemous. Lies of P is the only 3D Souls-like game where I was actually interested in the story and lore. First of all, the premise itself is enough to get my full attention. You're telling me this is a dark twisted version of the story of Pinocchio, but with a Souls-like twist? Just sign me up. Like, come on. Not only that, but the actual story of the game is easy to follow, and every time a cutscene plays, you just have to watch it because of the way it's presented. Speaking of cutscenes, I wish more Souls-like, apart from Lies of P and the FromSoft titles, made their cutscenes more interesting and captivating. As I stated before, every time a cutscene plays out in Lies of P, it immediately grabbed my attention. And it's the same thing with the actual Soulsborne games, but most other Souls-likes seem to not really can't really do this well. The cutscenes are just bland and boring. Now back to what I was saying about Lies of P. I'm not saying that this game has the best story ever told in gaming or it deserves an award for how good the story. No, I just really like how they handled telling a simple yet interesting tale. That's it. Now look at Blasphemous. The lore of the game is really deep and interesting, and what Blasphemous uses to capture your attention, making you interested in the lore, is the art direction. I'm pretty sure a lot of people are gonna ask questions after fighting a giant ancient looking snake with gold bling on it, or this giant baby thing being held up by a sentient humanoid vine creature. Just seeing all the weird looking shit in Blasphemous makes you question like what's actually going on in the world and what's the overall story. You know what I mean? Why is the main character's head so pointy? You know, stuff like that. Like it's just interesting. You gotta make the characters and the world interesting for people to give a shit about the lore. I feel like in order for more Souls-like to succeed, they need to start making their worlds more interesting and presenting it in a way better way. Let's move on to another crucial aspect that falls under overall gameplay, and that's level design. Level design is an obvious important factor of not just Souls games but a lot of games in general. One thing I realized that some Souls likes tend to forget that these types of games are supposed to be challenging but fun, not just difficult for the sake of being difficult. Even one of the Souls games was guilty of this, and that was Dark Souls 2. What I and a lot of people was, frustrated with the most about Dark Souls 2 was its over reliance on enemy mobs. It felt like every corner you turn, you're ready to get gangbanged by 6 enemy thugs or something. Unfortunately, for some reason, a lot of Souls-like said, you know what? Let's take that same unfun aspect and add it to a horror game. Like, that shit is so annoying. To be honest, I don't care how linear or complex the level design is, just please don't make the enemies annoying to deal with by spamming them in every corner of the map. Just don't, please. Also, it's good to have enemy variety as well. I hate when I'm playing any game, not just a Souls-like, and the enemies in the middle to like in the late game is the same exact ones from the earlier levels. Please, for any future Souls like that watching this video, please make good enemy variety in your game. And remember, difficulty doesn't just mean annoying. The next foundation I'm about to mention is probably the most important part, and that's combat. This is the make or break for a lot of Souls likes. Your game could have shit lore and bad level design, but the only saving grace could be a really fun like combat system. Now it's probably not enough to carry the whole game, but it's definitely enough to make people realize the game's potential. When it comes on to Souls-like combat, most of them feel a bit slow or clunky, and even the faster paced ones has a bit of clunkiness to them. They either have a bad hitboxes, super slow combat, or healing, or just no uniqueness to them. For some of the games, it's all of the above. But I feel like the only time when Souls-like combat succeed is when they make it engaging or innovative. With Neo, I really like the stamina recharge system because it's engaging. With Lies of P, I really love how you can assemble and disassemble weapons, and in my opinion, that's somewhat innovative. Now, the new Lords of the Fallen, and by the way, it looks like I'm trashing Lords of the Fallen. It's a decent game, but I'm not gonna go too deep into that. Watch my other video on Lords of the Fallen to know how I truly feel about this game. Now, Lords of the Fallen's combat isn't bad, but it does feel a bit clunky at times due to its weird animations and lock-on. However, the thing that I wish the game did was making the weapons feel more unique. Sure, some weapons might give you, extra faith damage or infernal damage, but I wish they implemented some sort of weapon arts or something else to make the weapons, feel unique. However, let's just say your Souls game that you're working on has mid-ass combat, meaning that it's not really bad, but it's just kind of boring and not too interesting. Then the other core foundation I'm going to talk about will probably make it go from like a 5 or 6 to like a 7 or possibly 8 out of 10. What I'm talking about is the bosses and boss fight. This is another thing where a lot of Souls likes tend to fuck up. They either focus too much on making the bosses overtuned or just making them as uninteresting and lame as possible. To make a boss fight fun, you actually have to give them cool movesets, animations, etc. However, to make them even better, you have to focus on the presentation and art style. By this, I mean just make them have interesting designs that, you know, just that looks cool. It doesn't have to be cool, like just make them look interesting. That's it. But now that I'm saying this, it's more of a me thing because it's subjective. However, again, look at Blasphemous, especially the first game. All the bosses looked cool and interesting and were presented well in their own weird, fucked up way. You know what I mean? But in the end of the day, just make sure. But at the end of the day, just make sure the boss fights are fun and engaging and presented right. Also, it's best to have quality over quantity. So overall, these were the core foundations that I think a lot of Souls likes don't get, and I feel like in order for a Souls like to exceed people's expectations, they need to be at least decent in all the 5 categories that I mentioned, which is story, lore, world building, combat bosses, level design. I know that sounds more than 5, but they gotta exceed in all of those things. At least be decent enough in all of those things. This video wasn't made to trash on Souls likes while decorating the actual Soulsborne games. It's just me giving my opinion and why most Souls likes, except for a few, can't compete with FromSoft and what they could do to fix that.